All right, it seems to stabilize at 19 people. I think that this is the time we can say hello and greetings to everybody. yGENers, welcome to Lunch and Learn. I am Bora Winkle, President and CEO of the BIA. I'm the moderator today for today's panel discussion. This is going to be about back then in 08, 09, when we had capital R recession, and in contrast with the things that are happening today. And boy, oh boy, what an amount of tumult that we're all going through. We're going to have the benefit of having three excellent speakers, people that were around in 08, 09, people who have preceded you in the formation of the yGEN, the young generation of leaders, something that has been a wonderful development for the BIA. They're going to share with you their experiences back then and how it plays out in today's world in imparting the lessons learned and hopefully give all of you guys the benefit of their wisdom. No particular order, the three panelists are Chris Hall. Chris is a third generation home builder. He started the industry 21 years ago with his father. And he's present president of Hallmark Communities. He was in 2019, he was the Builder of the Year. He serves on our BIA board and on our PAC, and he was a yGEN member, as I said before, from the very first hour. John Larea, who's also on the panel, he leads H.E. Fenton Company's corporate political strategy, their government relations and community outreach efforts. John is currently the Secretary Treasurer of the BIA board. He serves on the PAC, and he is a founding member of yGEN. And then third in the row, last but certainly not least, Alex Plishner. Alex is the Vice President of Forward Planning for Lennar's San Diego Division. He is the Vice Chairman of the BIA board. He serves on the PAC, and he too is a founding member of the yGEN. So Chris, John, Alex, all highly respected members of industry, and they each received many accolades, far too many to mention over here, but we are very fortunate to have them for the next hour for this chat. Now, before I open it up in the next 15 minutes for the panelists, let me just reflect on 08, 09 to kind of set the stage for what's going to be discussed. 08, 09, in comparison to today, you couldn't ask for a greater contrast in terms of the amount of building activity. When the recession with capital R burst in 07, 06, 07, and 08, San Diego was doing about 30,000+ housing permits, building units every year. So that was the age that we said and saw a lot of stupid money into the system, liar loans. It was the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And virtually overnight, the rug was pulled out of the financial market because it was an unsustainable torrent of money sold in the market through derivatives and collateralized mortgage obligations. In a nutshell, it was a huge financial mess. And from one year to another year, San Diego went from 30 to 40,000 building permits on par with what happened in the Riverside area to a complete ladder back in a downward turn. We went down to, I think, 2,000 to 4,000 building permits in a matter of a couple of years. BIA San Diego went from 1,500 members to 300 members, so we were not immune to it either. But the good thing we did in 08 was, anticipating all the changes that were ahead of us, we formed a yGEN leadership group. The future generation of BIA leaders, future generation of industry leaders. And those are the folks, some of them who are with us on this panel discussion that you're going to hear from today. They were there, and so let's turn it over to them and talk about the past experience first. So panelists, we're going to talk about the takeaways from the 08, 09 challenges and how you see that applying in the current environment. So my first question to you panelists is what and how would you describe your experience in 08, 09, and how does it compare to today?
Well, I'll start. I have a job. '08, '09 was an interesting time. I worked for a big home builder up in North County. We're building 500 to 600 homes a year. We went from building those 5 to 600 homes a year. Within 18 months, we had filed Chapter 11 and Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And the company went from 250 people down to 5 of us down at the end. And then that group of 5 went and then formed a little startup real estate company that stood on the courthouse steps with cashier's checks in our hands and bought houses and flipped houses for a while after that. So we are not in that situation, as you all know, and as Bor described already. We are in a much different situation, and I know that the for sale guys will talk about this a little more, but there are homes being sold. People want to own a shelter in this shelter-in-place environment. Our company, HG Fenton, where I am today, is in the for rent business. On half of our business is the for rent residential, half is on the commercial side of the business. We are leasing. We are leasing over the same time period from 2019 to 2020, from January 1 to June 1st. We've leased as many units this year as we did last year. So leasing's going well. Again, I think that shelter in place, the idea of keeping your shelter or having shelter is really important to people, which is different than last time.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. I just have to be perfectly clear. What we're going through now is nothing like 2008. In fact, I think, frankly, it's the exact opposite. I mean, every economic indicator back then is the exact opposite today, even with COVID going on. And back in 2008, the stock market was 7,000. Yesterday, the Dow hit 27,000. Back then, we were in the midst of a subprime disaster where anyone could make up any information and put a loan in the name of their family dog and get approved. Back then, our sales offices were competing with foreclosed homes that we built a half a block away, that had all the appliances ripped out, that had the lawns were brown, that had the cabinet doors, and they were selling our homes for $300,000 less. I mean, back in 2008, everyone has their story. There's the stories of one conference room, they gathered half the office, and the other conference room, they gathered the other half. And the one conference room, everyone was being let go. And the people in the other conference room were told to stay there until everyone else left. We all had that story. I got called one morning and said from my boss and said, "Don't come in this morning. It's a bloodbath. You're fine, but come in tomorrow when everything sort of settles down." And there's just countless stories that happened in 2008. That is not today. I'll get into numbers in a little bit of not only what Lennar is doing locally, but what we're doing across the United States. And we're having some of the best sales weeks we've had in years. What's happening today is just adjustments. It's challenges. It's a different environment. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing in those environments. And every week, there's new rules to play by. But our company and our industry is about making adjustments on the fly and keep doing what we do best. That's what I see what's happening today.
Thank you, Alex. How about that, Chris?
Yeah, I was definitely going to echo Alex's sentiment. I mean, this is not anywhere near what happened in 2008 and 2009 as far as affecting the home building industry and what's going on with buying and selling homes today. People are still buying and selling homes, but it is drastically done differently than even 4 months ago, as opposed to even 2008 and 2009. I was on the courthouse steps with John Larea in 2008 with cashier's checks, buying foreclosures, because our company completely pivoted. Even if, we had no problem building homes, getting financing and doing all that. But if you weren't buying a foreclosure, the market perceived you not getting a good deal. So buying and selling new homes in 2008, 2009 was a losing proposition. So we pivoted and survived and made it through and started to grow back again. But, there's still challenges out there, but they're not the challenges that were from 2008 and 2009. They're completely different challenges today. But the biggest thing was you got to recognize those challenges and you got to pivot to meet those challenges and not just assume that everything is going to be status quo moving forward.
Right. Well, we're whipping through this first portion of the Q&A. So let's get to the what skills did you employ? Did you need to attain to navigate '08 versus today? What allowed you to survive?
I'll start real quick. For us, obviously, the number one thing we did is we kept our cash as best we could. When you see tough times ahead, that's not the time to overexert yourself. That's not a time to purchase a bunch of fancy new things. You really got to keep your cash as best you can, because you're going to need it when times get tough. Even today, I think that's kind of an important thing to do. Yes, a lot of new homes are still getting sold and built, but it's still a little uncertain times. I wouldn't be overextending myself right now. Another quick thing for us was we really did our best to keep our best producing employees, because we knew we were going to come out the other side of this in 2008 and 2009 and even today. And we wanted to be able to grow again. You want your best employees around when you do that. So we did a good job of not just keeping the lowest cost employees or anything else. We kept our best producing employees, knowing that once we start growing again, trying to find a top producing employee is going to be tough. And those were two big things that we did that helped us come out of 2008 and 2009 and continue our success.
Any personal things you did differently? I know you talked about piggy banking, but what personally did you find as skills that kept your sanity?
Yeah, I mean, you found out how to do a lot more with less. I mean, one thing that we always talked about was keeping our core values. You know, there's a lot of comfort when you know who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, and keeping your core values true even in tough times is really important, because it helps you kind of realize that there's light at the end of this tunnel. You're not compromising yourself and what you want to do and who you are just to make it through. Personally, that was a big deal, is really kind of discovering what my core values were and what I wanted to keep within myself moving forward.
Yeah, I come from a little bit of a different angle, maybe. You know, I always think the test of a true leader is how they perform during a crisis or a pandemic or whatnot. That's the true leadership is, and rememberable leadership. The people you're going to remember is those leaders, and how they performed when times got tough. That times got tough in the last few months. When times got tough in 2008. That's who you remember. And I knew back in 2008, I knew I wasn't going to get a promotion. I knew, you know, you were lucky not only to hold on to your job, but you were fighting, you know, for just survival, just to stay employed. But you knew you weren't going to advance up the corporate ladder. And so what are you going to do with your time? You know, I decided very early on that I was going to spend the time knowing I wasn't going to, you know, be financially rewarded or get a promotion. I was going to make a name for myself. I thought that was important at the time. I thought that what was important is to be well known in the building industry. I wanted, you know, a goal I had was that every, you know, important person, as in people that, you know, kind of the veterans of the industry, I wanted them to know me on a first name basis. I thought that was important for the kind of as a long-term, you know, a long-term play, and something that I thought could, you know, help me out in the long term, was to make sure that people knew who I was, knew my capabilities, knew what I brought to the table. I was a horrific public speaker. That's another thing. Horrible, embarrassed, shy. And so I decided very early on I was going to take all the things I was bad at and try to get good at them. I volunteered back then to host and be the MC for all the PIA monthly breakfasts, and guess what? I was crappy. I was just absolutely horrific.
I can vouch for that. It was pretty bad.
You guys were, but you know what happened after 6 months, a year? I actually got pretty good at it. And you get comfortable. You get comfortable at the things that you're bad at. So I would look internally to each one of you and think of the things that you wish you could improve on, and this is the time to do it. You know, again, and Bora brought it up, you know, back in 2007, 2008, it was when we started the yGEN organization. We took 4 dumb kids, 2 of them are on this panel, and in 2 years we turned it into 120 studs in the industry. I mean, we were able to reinvent ourselves, create something new, put something that's obviously stood its test of time, as everyone knows what it's today. That was created during a crisis. That was created during a time of uncertainty. And so, you know, this is a great opportunity to do the next, whatever it is, the next group that's going to make a difference, you know, 10, 12, 15 years from now. Now's the time to think down deep into your soul and see what of those changes you can make as a true future leader of this industry.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this question, and what I've kind of come up with is, in my mind, the kind of summarize of keys of success were the ability to be adaptable, so adaptability, the ability to be productive, and the ability to be opportunistic. As I mentioned, I worked for a large home builder up in North County. We had a little startup real estate company coming out of that for about a year and a half. I went from there, as that kind of faded away, I went to work for CityMark Development. And from CityMark Development, I had the opportunity to come over to HG Fenton. And Alex touched on this. The platform that allowed me to go from Barrett American to the Barrett Group, the startup company, to CityMark, to HG Fenton, that platform was the BIA. The fact that I was involved in the BIA, that I gave more of my time, volunteer time in tough times to the BIA, that allowed me to stay in this industry. But that can't just be the only thing that keeps you in, because a company has to see you do those 3 things. You have to be adaptable. So you may not be doing what you thought you were going to be doing. You may be doing something that doesn't seem to be at your level. You may be asked to do things that you are so uncomfortable with, and you have to be comfortable in that uncomfortableness, because you don't know what it's going to be. You have to be productive. So when in the end, you know what's important for us to do is to be productive. And when our boss asks us to do something, and that boss can take a lot of different forms, whether that's a shareholder, whether that's the CEO, whether that's a mid-level manager, whether that's your wife or husband, that boss can be a lot of different things. In the end, for life, you better be productive, because that in the end makes them happy. And so think about that, being adaptable, being productive. And then that last piece is being opportunistic. And that's kind of a little harder to describe, but it's a bit of an awareness as you look around and you say, how can I help the organization I'm working for at the time make some money? How can I help this organization improve their employee experience? How can I help the volunteer, the subcommittee that I'm working on at the BIA drive forward? So the opportunistic's a little more vague, and it's keeping an eye out for adding value in any place that you're in. So I see it as adaptability, productivity, and being opportunistic as being some of the key skill sets moving forward.
Okay.
At a time like this.
So someone from Car Builders threw a question at me. It's a kind of a 2-4, and we have about a minute left in this segment, which is past experience, and it's a nice segue to bridging to the next segment. The question is, having lived through what I call the recession of capital R, how have your companies and you individually shifted your approach to systematic market uncertainties and opportunities that may have resulted from it? And then the follow-on was, moreover, what did you learn from this past experience, and how are you applying this in today's landscape? And you can see how that is sort of a bridge question to the next segment. Any one of you, sort of rapid fire answer before we get into the next section.
I think market uncertainty gives you, again, it is the best platform for you to move up. It is the best platform for you to make a name for yourself. That's the individual. And then as a company, those are your best buys. Those are your best buys to get a basis on a foreclosed home. We personally bought a foreclosed home during the last downturn. It's a great cash flowing asset that we personally own right now. Other companies in our industry have made a lot of money and created a lot of value because they did have cash, as Chris described, and they saw the buys based on the data in the marketplace to lock those in and then either hold or sell them at the right times.
Chris,
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Bora. What were you going to ask?
yeah, quick answers.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, obviously cash is the big deal. It's very difficult when things look really tough to spend your cash, but the ultimate name of the game is buy low and sell high. And if you have the cash or the ability to get cash to do that when the market is depressed, that's when you would better be served to buy stuff than sell.
I was just going to say, you know, there's no such thing as a good selling market and a good buying market. Everyone knows who's bought a home that's tried to time both perfectly. It's impossible. And usually you're doing both at the same time. You're trying to sell a house and buy a house, and you're giving on something and hopefully, you know, reaping the rewards of the other. So, you know, what we learned in 2008, where it was a huge dip, where it automatically changed from one metric to the other, versus today. Today, it's a little more kind of fluctuations, ups and downs. You're still not going to time anything perfectly, and the decision you make in one day may be a different decision you would have made the following Monday. And it's fine. I mean, you don't look back. I try to tell myself not to look back at the decisions I made and regret them, or look back and say, think I missed an opportunity, and just look forward, because there's going to be a new set. You know, the metrics, the economic metrics are going to look different a few days from now as well. So, you know, it's timing. Everyone, I think, has tried to rely their entire life on being perfect at timing, and no one has ever figured out that crystal ball.
Okay, so moving into the next section is, we've called it between us, the supply and demand section. And it starts with the question, what does the industry look like from your individual perspectives? And as I ask that question, I'm going to let Zoe put on the first poll for our audience to answer to. So have at it.
Let me answer this thing here first.
We have to answer too.
I just tried, but they're not letting me. That's
not letting me.
Panelists cannot vote. No.
Yeah, I'll dive in real quick. I mean, it's a very robust market. There are a lot of buyers, and there are not a lot of homes to buy. So we've created, or what currently exists is a market where we're undersupplied significantly. However, we're also in a market that is very unaffordable for your average home buyer. When you put those dynamics together, it tells me that affordable first-time home buyer product is going to do well. And what we're seeing, and what we've pivoted our company to even before COVID and anything else, was to more first-time home buyer product. That segment of the market has always been the deepest and biggest, but has always had the most challenges. And what has happened is you've had a historically low, interest rates have gotten historically lower, and has made first-time home buyer product, which is still expensive, more affordable. And to me, what we're seeing is a very robust market, especially on that lower end first-time home buyer product. I think COVID has only pushed that forward, because a lot of people who could afford a home were choosing to rent for lifestyle reasons. Those lifestyle reasons have been turned upside down, and a lot of people who are on the sidelines are now jumping in, even creating more interest in especially first-time home buyer product.
Yeah, for the poll, I see the results for that. Speaking from the largest for sale home builder in the United States, does the audience want to rent or buy? Of course, it's rent. No. Yeah, they want to buy eventually. It may not be today, but we actually we want to see more renters too, because renters are always become buyers in the future typically. So seeing a proliferation of more buyers or more renters, it all helps at the end, which is usually the end goal is home ownership. We in terms of preferences, we met with Standag last week, and they told us I think it was 12% of the workforce is currently telecommunicating, and that was pre-COVID, by the way. What is it today? 75%, 80%, 90%? I don't. We don't even know what the numbers are. And what is it going to be like in a few months? When there's kind of a hybrid approach of folks coming back part-time into the office and out. But currently, what we assume at some point in the late summer, the early fall, there's going to be some number in between those two numbers of what people are going to be doing, the telecommuting. So what are their preferences going to be? Well, if they're telecommuting, they need to set up shop at home, right? And we see a lot of video calls. I'm on video calls all day long. Most of the people in my office are. And we're on calls with people where they're setting up shop in their kitchen. They're in their bedroom. Their kids are running by. My kids get on about 90% of my phone calls. I have my daughter sitting on my lap because she doesn't like to be more than 5 feet away from me. But that's the world we're living in. I mean, it's kind of fun because you get to see where people live and kind of see what their life outside of work, what it is like at home. And it's kind of enjoyable to see that. But that is the world that we have. And so your preference becomes, how do you adapt to your home life to make it your work life as well? And your buyer preference of what you're going to look for in a home has to be, you have to start thinking about that now. So maybe I'm comfortable renting a place, but I need to be set up to be doing my telecommuting now. Or I want to buy a house that I can set up shop to have a home office, or have a space that I can call my own, that I can do whatever the job is at hand that you have to do. That's certainly what's going to become the buyer preference here. If it isn't already, it's going to be so in the near future.
So before you guys jump in, Alex already seamlessly moved into the telecommuting side, which we reserved for a little bit further down the road. But he is answering the question, what does the industry look like from his perspective? And telecommuting is an obvious change agent. Chris and John, you have another take on this?
Yeah, well, I just want to finish the supply and demand thing from the for rent side just real quick. When this first happened, we thought it was possible that we were going to come out of this, and maybe because a lot of people lost their jobs, that you were going to see less demand for a rental product, because people quickly would start getting roommates and fill up and share units. We haven't seen that yet. We still see people wanting their own shelter in this shelter-in-place environment, which means that this long-standing lack of supply is still in place. And we talk about it every day at the BIA. The fact is, we're building about 40 or 50% of the units that demand requires that we build, maybe even less than that. Maybe it's 30 or 40%. And that's still the paradigm. I haven't seen people group up, and it's easier in a for rent market than a for sale market to do that. And now that may change, but we haven't seen that yet. The downtown market, the downtown with elevators, that's been a little harder to lease than non-elevator buildings. I would say that's kind of a specific example of what's happening with supply demand. If there's an elevator, people seemed a little nervous and have continued to seem a little nervous about being in a building like that. And I think that shifts to the telework idea, which is, as employers, so our company owns mostly light industrial, on the commercial side, mostly light industrial product and low scale office, not high rise office. And again, that kind of gathering of people in a central space and having to go up and down an elevator, I think will still be something until there's some technology that deals with the sanitation of those spaces on a regular basis and people are comfortable with that. I think the telework idea is just going to remain very strong, especially for people that work in that sort of office environment. And I think that will carry on for a long time.
So, yeah, my opinion on telework, so people buy homes predominantly once family creation starts, and people buy homes not only to lay down roots, but they typically move to better school districts, better neighborhoods than they were living in when they were renting. And that's your typical migration pattern here. So when we talk about telecommuting as it relates to housing, do I think people are going to buy a $250,000 house in Victorville, even though they work in Mission Valley? And my answer is no. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, will somebody that works in San Diego move to Denver or Texas or somewhere extreme telecommuting? That's possible, because they will move to a neighborhood and a school district that they're looking for, that they can afford, which they might not be able to find within Southern California or San Diego. You know, I don't believe people are going to move 2 hours away to buy a less expensive home if that neighborhood is not a good neighborhood. They would only do that if they can go to a good neighborhood, and that might not be in Southern California in a market that they can afford. That's my opinion.
Okay. We're coming up to a couple of poll questions we can put up. And as we put these, the first poll question up, Zoe, the panelist questions were going to be, how is working from home beneficial for the employer versus is it productive for the employee? And so let's get into that. I know you've touched upon it. Let's maybe dial it in a little deeper. Employer benefits versus employee productivity, and we've got a poll question up. And I invite the panelists to kind of weigh in as our audience.
I'll weigh in while you're answering it. I mean, I think anyone can agree that you can be just as productive, if not more productive, working from home. I mean, obviously you don't have the commuting hours. You don't, the technology is there where you can go from meeting to meeting. We talked, we were at this Sandag call. We were talking about how it's not necessarily the commuting time that's really affecting our workday. It's driving from meeting to meeting to meeting throughout the day. That cuts out so much of your productive time that obviously goes away. I'm more concerned about what working from home does to the psyche, your mental psyche of, being able to set your work aside and concentrate on your family. That's clearly, been blurred. I've talked to a lot of people that says, now you're working from home. You're just the way you live your life during the work hours and the non-work hours sort of all get blended into one. From a employer standpoint, you probably get more time out of your employees, but from the employee standpoint, there's less time or less ability to shut themselves off and focus on what's obviously, in my opinion, the most important, which is your family. Being able to do that when you had to actually physically drive to a place, do your job, do it well, and then come home, and being able to set aside your work, which I know all of us have a tough time setting aside work, but at least you're physically distance yourself from it versus being, 10 feet away from your work when you're leaving your office space to concentrate on your family. And I'm guilty of it just myself. I've had a tough time doing this kind of new role here in the last couple months. Mentally, because you just feel like you're trying to be a dad, you're trying to be a husband, you're trying to be a good employee, and you're trying to be good to everyone all at the same time versus at different times. That's probably the only thing I would just sort of warn people against, is making sure you can still balance your life out even in this new setting. And it's tough. not easy to do. If anyone here that's in the audience has figured it out, I'd love to hear from them. But it's something that, you know, we're all sort of trying to figure out.
Real quick to piggyback off of that, I think it's important for people to know about themselves, whether they work better in an environment by themselves or an environment with a lot of people. I mean, basically, it's like the introvert versus extrovert. Like for me personally, I could never work completely by myself at my house. It would drive me too crazy. You know, I thrive off of having other people around and hustling and bustling and just talking and bouncing ideas off of people. So it's a case by case basis. I think people need to really understand more about themselves. Can you sit for 9-10 hours by yourself and not go crazy?
So I was literally just on a call discussing this internally at our office, and this kind of came to mind. I don't know if it'll resonate here or not. I think what you're going to see a lot of is you're going to see the company cultures, which are emphasize and have emphasized the idea of productivity with people in the office and that energy that's created from that. And there is a company culture that exists in that way. And I think Chris was just describing that in some ways. Then you have the personal culture and which I think right now I sense, and I just looked at this poll where it said, do you think you are productive from working from home? And 71% said yes. I think you have the personal culture at home, which says I can be productive, as productive, if not more productive, and retain the flexibility that I want to have. So you have a company culture that may say, hey, I'm used to having you in the office to be productive. You may have personal culture that says I can still be productive, and I want to retain this flexibility that I've had. I see those two things kind of bouncing against each other and continue to bump up against each other and be kind of the push and pull that's occurring. And I'm going to take a little risk because I just used this. What came to mind, the visual that came to mind is that when you have two land masses that are bumping up against each other, which is this company culture of productivity and this personal culture of flexibility, when they bump together, they either push each other up and create a mountain and really succeed and work well together, or they kind of crash and both sink together. And I see the opportunity for good companies to take the company culture, which has created productive, positive places for people to earn great paychecks and bonuses and you know, the value of life when you get up in the morning, you want to do something and create something. And then that flexibility coming together and the opportunity for the companies to create the platform for those two cultures to come together and really rise up. Again, I kind of took a risk because I just said that, so it may make no sense, but it made sense in my head.
I've been in meetings with John for many, many years, decades, and rarely does he not go like a fist and a fist and put them together and do something with it.
It's the Italian in me. I got to use my hands, man.
Tectonic.
Okay.
Okay.
What about this one?
Yeah. Well, you know,
That's too complicated.
That's funny that you should say that, Chris, because, you know, there's a lot of non-industry insiders or non-industry people who are wondering if the increased telecommuting means less office space requirements by the employer world. And does that mean a reduction of the downtown needs for space? And does that mean a reduction for the demand of transit-oriented developments? I mean, one could argue that COVID-19 brought to the fore the epicenters of infection, and people may be afraid to go back to downtown or afraid to use public transportation. I'm using that question because it goes a little bit towards the legislative prediction side of our conversation. And maybe I could start you off with that.
Yeah, I think office demand is definitely going to go down. Are we going to get rid of offices altogether? Absolutely not. I think, you know, what happened with COVID was so unique and so unpredictable. It's hard to overreact, or I should say it's easy to overreact a lot of times. I think telecommuting in some form is here to stay. Twitter said every employee is going to work from home for the rest of their lives or something. I don't think that's going to be the norm. I think there will be a hybrid approach of some working at home and some working at the office. And I think increasing your employees' happiness level increases their productivity. So if you can have employees who are productive and happier by having a hybrid approach of working at home and working from the office is the best solution as an employer. And I have a few employees that are on that, and I'm super happy with their level of production. I don't think offices are going to wait, but yeah, transit-oriented development is a whole different argument, and I don't see the demand for it nearly as much as I did pre-COVID. And I see kind of the opposite, where there's going to be a much higher demand for single-family homes in the suburbs than there is for high-density transit-oriented development in the urban cores. We've been down this path of transit-oriented development for years on the legislative side. I don't know if that avalanche is too hard to stop, but I could sell single-family detached homes in a good suburban area much faster, and there's a lot higher demand than I could for attached urban transit-oriented development homes.
We kind of joke about it and say, it takes Mother Nature to second guess a road you've been down forever, because for years and years, like Chris was saying, everything was, let's push density, let's push transit, let's push this, let's push that. And you need kind of a kick in the butt to say, wait, hold on. People do want choices. And you can, all of us can talk over blue in the face to politicians and whatnot, the folks that have, their final say on this. But sometimes it takes Mother Nature. Sometimes it takes a worldwide virus to kick you in the butt and say, hold on, pause, stop. Let's make sure what we're doing is for the right reason. And, I always see silver linings in everything. And there's certainly plenty of silver linings in what's happened in the last couple of weeks, or last couple of months, sorry. And this is one of them, is to let you take a break, rethink the models that you're trying to put forward, where a one size fits all, and maybe that's not the approach. And I think some good outcomes are going to happen because of that.
So I'll answer it a little differently. Same idea though. I don't think COVID changes it at all. Here's why. I don't think there was a ton of demand for mass transit in the first place. I think customer demand, and Alex and I had this conversation with Sandag on Friday. And maybe I would love for all of you to ask this of yourselves. If you had the money, if you had the resources, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to be in downtown, or would you prefer to have a backyard? Start there. And what we were trying to explain to Sandag is I do think the majority of people would prefer to have their own space, their own backyard, lock their own door, and not get into an elevator. Now, I say that as I work for a company, and I, as a guy who's worked on projects that have been built in the urban core, I believe there's a need for more projects in the urban core. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is a very strong demand for not being in the urban core. So how do we serve those customers? How do we serve both? From a mass transit perspective, I think we are behind where Korea and some of the Asian countries have been that have dealt with some pandemics over the last few years. They've really moved ahead with technology, whether that's ultraviolet light or those sort of things that sanitize the interior spaces of elevator cabs or mass transit. People are more used to that, and maybe we get there so it allows the platform for people to use more mass transit, but I still don't think that impacts the demand of the customer for what they really want if they could afford it. And so I still see it kind of similar as it is today, moving forward in a lot of ways.
It's two things. It's comfort, and it's what's your best option. I mean, the reason why public transportation works in New York City, it's the best option for most of the folks, is to get on the New York subway system. We don't have that in California, certainly not in Southern California, and certainly not in San Diego. It's not your best option. And once the option that you're doing right now, which is getting in your car and driving somewhere, is not your best option anymore, which is what it is in some of those metropolitan cities, is when you push to something else. And then you have to feel comfortable in that surrounding as well, which is what we just recently learned. But, and even the executive director of Sandag said, until it becomes your best option to get from where you need to be to where you're going, it's not going to be, there's no way it's going to become the primary. And then he sort of goes two-faced and still pushes it anyways. But the way this city was designed, the way all of California was designed, is not the same way that it was that the city was designed. New York City and Chicago, all those different places. San Francisco is close, but at the same time, the subway system within San Francisco is not as robust as New York and other places. That's more of a public transportation system to get out to the suburbs, not within the city itself. New York is set up in no way the same way, nor will it ever be set up the same way.
Well, if the main point of transit-oriented development is to get people closer in so that we're not commuting and creating greenhouse gases and destroying the environment, yet we're moving forward in an environment where more people are working from home and commuting less, then the environmental not requirements, but the environmental issues that are resolved by transit-oriented development diminish. The market and the people are already telling us they don't want transit-oriented development or high density. Why are we still pushing that agenda forward? Although, is the avalanche too big to stop at this point? Ultimately, we need all sorts of housing no matter how we can get it at the end of the day, but we are completely cutting off suburban single-family detached housing. And that's a huge mistake, given that's where a majority of new buyers are going to want to live.
John, give you kind of heads up. We're sort of in the 10-minute environment to close, I believe, if this was in 1 hour session. And Zoe will correct me if she says, no, we have a half an hour extra. So I'll know that flexibility soon. But in the legislative prediction side of our agenda, I look to you as one of our gurus, the downtown. Make a couple legislative predictions. Split tax roll comes to mind. The VMT discussion comes to mind. These are things that are super impactful to our industry.
Yeah, well, there's a question in the box about property taxes. And I think that ties in, the first thing that came to mind was split roll. So there's a ballot measure coming up in November. It's called split roll. It has to do with the idea that in the state of California, there has been this now I'm worried about how I use my hands because of what Alex said. There's Prop 13 that's in place, which has kept a kind of manageable rate of property taxes on people if they don't transact. If they hold their property over a period of time, they know how much their property taxes are going to grow, and it's not at an exorbitant rate. Of course, with that, your property tax revenues that then go up to the state may be less than what they would prefer to have. And so what you've seen over the years is different split roll ideas where you may leave the residential properties, those that are being used as a residential property, in that Prop 13 sort of environment, but you take the commercial properties and you free it up. So you reassess those properties on a regular basis. And the split roll that's coming up is a reassessment of every commercial property in the state of California on an every 3-year basis. So for us, that's a big deal personally. For many out there, especially small businesses, it's a huge deal because in most landlord-tenant relationships, the landlord passes the cost of the property tax along to the tenant. So that small business owner who's leasing a space is the one who's going to be paying that property tax increase in the end. That's a big deal from an operating expense perspective. So prediction is the UF split roll coming up. I've seen polls kind of landing in the 50-50 right now, for and against. I see a discussion around the idea that schools are hurting right now financially. The school districts are the ones who have been pushing this idea of split roll because it can increase funding. And I see it really being a discussion going into November. I see the other side saying, look, small businesses, the last thing they need is increased costs in order to come out of the ground and generate the jobs that then allow people to go out and lease, rent, and buy homes throughout California. And without small business job generation, you really have a state that's stuck in gear and not moving forward. So I see that the discussion coming forward. I can't predict. I have no idea which way this is going to go. I have my own feelings on what we should be doing as an industry, and it's not supporting the split roll initiative. And then, Bora, you mentioned VMT. VMT is the vehicle miles traveled. That's a new way to measure how cars generate pollution in California and how they impact people in California. And they've weighed the idea that pollution from exhaust is more important than being stuck at a stoplight on a street. That's kind of what's going on with VMT. Because of the state's general momentum right now, I don't see that changing. I think that continues forward. What you may see is some studies that look at this little experiment we just had about working from home and saying, well, maybe the impact isn't as great if companies continue to work from home. And I don't have a prediction there so much, but something to watch. Sorry for the ADU noise that's going on in the background. Somebody's building an ADU, speaking of new housing, right next to you.
Yeah, when it comes to gas emissions, I mean, the air right now is probably about as clear as Lake Tahoe is, and it's, and people just aren't in their cars. I mean, no one's stuck in traffic, at least not nowadays. And so I think the VMT model needs to get recalculated, recalibrated. It's going to change. If it's really a study on how much people are driving, like to and from work, but on a daily basis, the model's got to be rethought. I still think there's going to be a push for density. They have to. I think they've spent way too much time, way too much money, way too much effort to abandon it. I think the train has certainly moved in that direction, even if getting out of this pandemic. The only thing I think will come out of it is that the idea that there still needs to be choice will still play into the decision making. It's not the end all be all, like I said, to have density, but we are pretty landlocked, and it is typically the easier way. There's fewer barriers to entry to do an infill project than there is obviously a suburban master plan that takes many years to get entitled. And also the politicians are, seem to be making it or wanting to make it economically infeasible to build outside of those urban rings. I mean, that's what the VMT model is trying to discourage it by taxing a big fee on builders to build out in the suburbs. So, hopefully the model gets rethought. I would assume you would have to, but a lot of the things that have been in place have been going on for many years to get us to this point, and I don't see them completely abandoned. We just have to keep working through it like we always do, and still push like we always push for choice.
Chris, give us a quick take you may have to share, and then I'm going to go to questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to add. We are getting severely penalized, mainly from VMT calculations for producing housing in suburban cores, based on the fact that it create more pollution. But everything is still, looked at county by county, where we're not necessarily looking at, okay, well, if we're not supplying detached urban housing or suburban housing in San Diego and people want to get it, they're going to go outside the county to get it. And we're not calculating what that does to the environment itself. So if people are commuting in from Temecula or Riverside or even Orange County, we're not calculating that impact on our roads. We're only calculating kind of what's in our own little bubble here. And I think that's not taking the bigger picture in mind. It's almost dumb to think that, our pollution doesn't go across county borders. There needs to be a broader look at pollution in general. And having somebody commute 2 hours from Temecula is definitely not helping, and it is worse than having somebody commute 30 minutes from Scripps Ranch to downtown or something.
Yes, right. Good. We come to the Q&A side here. Question that was raised in the box. What's the best thing yGEN members should do right now to get more involved in the industry? Any one of you?
Well, I'll speak from the political perspective. You got an election coming up in November. So understanding who the pro-business and the pro-housing candidates are, making sure you vote for them and making sure you bring people along with you to vote for them is really key. We have platforms for that at the BIA for you to understand that. You're welcome to reach out to me or Bor or any of us to understand more. But those in this environment, it's going to be really interesting to have a campaign that isn't as much door-to-door and hand-to-hand discussions. And so being engaged and getting the right people elected to help make the right leaders make the right decisions to help us out is really key.
I go back to what I said before, make a name for yourself. Join, join the board, the yGEN board, join 2 other boards, volunteer your time on other committees. Not only just be on those committees, but take leadership roles on them. Do it when you're uncomfortable doing it. I joined my first council at the BIA when it was my first year out of college or out of grad school. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anyone. I had no business being there, and I was certainly uncomfortable doing it and never looked back. Join something or take a leadership role, especially when you feel uncomfortable doing it, because that's the only time when do it now. Why wait till you get comfortable? You may never be comfortable.
That's like me moderating this thing. I was very uncomfortable doing it.
I would say also on top of that, get your core group of people that you think are smart and going places and accomplishing things in this industry, and broaden that circle to incorporate people that are outside of your core job, and just to constantly look for good people to surround yourself with that aren't necessarily your coworkers and things like that. Just always being around good people and bouncing things off of them is going to help you grow and learn things that you never learned before, and frankly find people that aren't somebody that you might have thought you would connect with before. Diversity is an absolutely great thing to have, and so I would definitely advocate growing your circle and including some diversity in that.
People that are doing different jobs than you. I didn't know John before we started yGEN, and he was a groomsman in my wedding. I mean, you don't know who you're gonna meet or who you're gonna become friends with, but I guarantee there's people on that yGEN list that are gonna become lifelong friends to you, and people that you can find in for the rest of your career.
So I encourage the audience, if you have a cue, throw it to us in the box. We'll try to answer it. And in the meantime, wrap up by our panelists. Is there something you wanted to convey that we didn't get to?
Can I say something real quick? Just kind of given some macro level, I want to give encouraging information for what's happening in the country from the home building and home selling side. This market is extremely robust. I couldn't be more high on where the market is today. Last week, our company sold 1,500 homes in the United States. It's a huge number. In Phoenix, we sold 100 homes, 100. That hasn't happened in Phoenix in years.
Yeah, they're all from California.
Yeah, they're moving. A number of those communities.
You took my renters.
Yeah, a number of those communities have sales agents that are completely remote. They don't even work on site, and that's due to COVID. So it's, we've rethought our business. This working remote thing is working when you can adapt to it. It clearly is working in a number of places. You don't necessarily need to be present or in the place that you need to sell. It doesn't always have to be that way, and the numbers are showing. I mean, it is a great housing market right now, and you would think this virus would have been a kick in the pants otherwise. No, the market is fantastic right now. It's certainly in San Diego, and we keep pushing along.
John?
I would just say that I agree with Alex. It's very robust. Demand is there for housing. It's the shelter in place idea. we may see some bumps as we get towards the end of the year, going into next year. You may lose some stimulus funding, those sort of things. And going back to the idea in your own companies and in your own world, what you can't, we talked about a lot of this in my family over the last few months. The amount you can really control in life, Alex, I'm not using fists, I'm using tiny little fingers. The amount you can really control is so small. And that may be uncomfortable to you, but make yourself comfortable in that, knowing that having that the ability to be adaptable, the ability to be productive, and the ability to be opportunistic is going to get you through any of that uncertainty. And you almost have to assume there is always going to be uncertainty. You have to assume, even if the market's good, there's uncertainty. Even if the market's great, it's uncomfortable. And Alex touched on that. Be comfortable in that uncomfortableness and drive forward.
Chris.
I was just going to add real quick. I mean, from a company owner perspective, I'm always looking at my plan Bs and my plan Cs. And as an employee or any person in the job market, you have to have the same thought process. You can't get too high at the highs. You can't get too low at the lows. You always need to have your plan Bs and your plan Cs in your back pocket. And you know, there's real estate market is never a certainty, no matter how high the high is and no matter how low the low is. There's opportunities when things are bad. When things are good, it's just one infectious disease away from crumbling at your feet. So, you know, have your plan Bs and have your plan Cs, but always be productive, always be available, and always be growing, and always reassessing yourself and what's important for you.
Thank you, panelists. We've come to the termination of the hour. Someone insists on asking about my mustache. I will give the answer.
Please shave that thing.
Yeah, it will be gone at the next seminar because it's not my thing.
You must have gotten a compliment from Kay, and so you've kept it on for a long time.
This was very joyful, very optimistic. I really appreciated all of our panelists to share your wisdom. Go yGEN, people on this call, give more time to yGEN. Look what it did for these three. It can do it for you too. So with that,
hold on. I just want to say thank you to the yGEN leaders and the guys that are in it. You have carried on something that we knew nothing. We didn't know what we were doing, and it was a disaster when we started the thing. We set it. Well, you were leading it, so it was a disaster. No, we set up a framework, and I just want to compliment everybody that has carried it forward and is carrying it forward now. I really enjoy seeing what you guys are doing, so thank you.
I mean, it's the greatest joy in our career, just seeing something that we took a leap of faith on and seeing it last for eternity.
Perfect.
So thank you very much.
And good job, Bora.
Take care, everybody. Be safe. Be healthy.
Hopefully see everybody soon.